So, welcome to my segment called The Simplicity and Ugliness of Racism in America. Racism is a topic that we have been really talking about for the last few months amidst of the COVID-19 issues and the self-quarantine, the social distancing. We have been doing a lot of different things, but one of the highlights of this time has been the fact that we've had to also deal with the atrocities of racism. And I wanted to do this series on racism because I really believe it's very important it's definitely important to me as a black man in America. And I know it's important to a lot of people, both blacks and whites. And I want to make sure that there is a dialogue that we start here today. So again, my name is Mario Depeine, and I'm going to give you a little history about me so that you can have a sense of where I'm coming from. First of all, I want to let you know that I graduated from Princeton University. I had a BA in psychology in Princeton. All right, so I said to you that I am a graduate from Princeton University, class of 1985. That's a great class. We refer to that as a class that Michelle Obama graduated from. And we at Princeton University, especially the black students, the black alumni, are very proud of her for what her and her husband have done as examples in America. And we are just really excited to talk about this topic. I'm excited about it, but I'm also apprehensive because I know there are a lot of people who really do not want to hear about this topic. But hopefully they will sit through it and decide that this is a topic not just for blacks, but it's a topic for all of us. So, first thing. One of the things that I want to let you know is that I love psychology. That's why I majored in it. But my first influence for psychology was in high school, where I had a black teacher in psychology, and I was really impressed with who he was and just how he taught psychology. And I told you I had a VA from Princeton, but not only that, I decided to go into clinical psychology to get a doctorate, but I only did one semester of clinical psychology. And I attained a B+ average, but what I realized when I was in that doctoral program is that I could not picture myself sitting in a session with a client and help them, but also think about social issues or social injustice issues. My wife is a marriage and family therapist, so at least one of us has pursued that. So I'm glad to see what she's doing and the difference that she's making. But I just felt like it would be unfair for me to try to sit with a client and at the same time go, "Did you hear what happened? Did you see that police shooting? Do you realize that we have to do something?" So that's what I pictured myself doing. I felt like I was going to limit myself. So that's why I did not pursue the doctoral program in clinical psychology. But let me tell you some more. Right now, I'm a full-time teacher. I also do IT work for my school. I do a lot of different things, but I'm also certified as a science teacher. And I've taught social studies. I've taught history. I've taught physics. I've taught classes on the universe and just how the universe is formed, and looked at things like genetics and biology. So I have a lot of different interests. I'm also a Bible student and a Bible teacher. I've been studying the Bible consistently for at least 30 years. I love the Bible. I'm a Christian. I'm also a black Christian. And I really want to say that because I want people to understand that as much as I am a believer of God and I trust in God, God has given me a special place in America, that I am a black Christian in America because I have this skin that America seems to have a problem with. Now, there's nothing wrong with the skin. There's nothing abnormal about the skin. It's just pigmentation. But in America, there's a system that has been set up to go contrary to the lives of the people who have this skin. So we're going to get into that. But I told you I'm a Christian. I've also written a book. The book is called Emmanuel's Bride and the Holy Spirit, Building a Whole New World. The book is really helping people to see that God has always had a plan for us, to walk with us, to be among us. And I really wanted to write that book to help Christians to understand that we have to stay away from being ritualistic, but to really learn to be people that are connected to God and are walking with God. So that's why I wrote the book. Now, I discuss a lot of different topics in the book. I also discuss racism in church in the book as well. And most people are really fine with it, but unfortunately, there are some of my white brothers and sisters who had a problem with the fact that I talked about racism and even discussed that there could be racism in the church. And the reason I find that interesting is that when we are uncomfortable with getting into that topic, we're uncomfortable because somehow we have not grasped the extent of what racism is and how deep it goes and how pervasive it is and how much it impacts every facet of American life. And I'm hoping that with this part one of my talk about the simplicity and ugliness of racism, that you will get a better sense of what I'm saying, especially coming from a psychology background. I want to look at some psychological parts to that. All right, so let's continue. I'm also a YouTuber, which is very clear to you. I'm a YouTuber. I'm a songwriter. I have 2 songs and Apple iTunes and etc. One is called "How Do You Sit There?" It's a political type of song, and then the other song is called "Shot into History." Trayvon Martin, Amadou Diallo, and Sean Bell, and that song is really addressing the fact that so many families in America, so many black families in America, have had to deal with the grief of losing a loved one, and at the hands of law enforcement or people who believe they were law enforcement or people who decided to be vigilantes, and they killed innocent young black men and women. When I think about people like Trayvon Martin, I think about the young man Castile. I think about Sandra Bland, and there's so many different people that we could name. And I say, this is so sad. And the thing that bothers me is that this is supposed to be a Christian nation. And then there are people who really believe they're Christians, and they go, well, he shouldn't have been there, or well, you know, he shouldn't have hit that person or whatever. And we're talking about people having self-defense. But we're going to get further into that. So I'm a YouTuber. I do a lot of DIY projects, do-it-yourself projects, etc. I speak 4 different languages. I love languages. And I just love doing a lot of different things. And so I have a lot of different interests. But I think one of the most important things for me is that I like to help people to overcome. That's what I like. I like helping people to overcome, to really decide on how they can take an obstacle and confront the obstacle and go beyond the obstacle. So I'm hoping that with this discussion that we'll be able to work as a team to deal with racism and as a collective. All right, so first thing, I want to say thank you to all of my white allies who have taken the steps to help blacks in dealing with this issue of racism. And you're going to hear me say words like blacks and whites, because that's really what it is. I'm not going to use the word Caucasian. I'm going to use the word black and the word white. I might occasionally say African American, but I'm mostly going to say black or white. And the reason I'm doing that is because history of racism started out as a black and white issue. If you were black, you were treated a certain way. If you're white, you were treated another way. So that's why I'm making it about black and white, because it is a black and white issue. So going back to my white friends, my white people who are in solidarity, who are really helping, who have marched and protested this issue and really put themselves on the line and decide that they're going to say what they think, and they're going to use their white privilege. Yes, I did say white privilege because that's an issue in America, and we'll get into that. They're going to use that. They use their white privilege. They're using their white resources that they have amassed for all these years or have been given to them, and they're saying, we want to fix this and we want to change this and we don't agree with this. So I want to say a big thank you to you for deciding that you're going to help us with this issue. But not just help blacks, but that you're going to help America. Because this issue that America has is a big dysfunction. This is a dysfunctional family in America, and we have to look at it for what it is. Excuse me, I need to get some water. So, the first thing I want to say is that I know there are people, as I'm doing this topic, there are people who are hearing the word racism or race, and they go, oh, not again. Oh, can you just put it to rest? And they're uncomfortable with the topic. You could tell. You'll be in a social setting and you say, yeah, there's been a police shooting of a black person, or there's racial issues, and they just tense up. And they tense up like, please do not talk about this. Please hide me. Please get this away from me. And I want to give you some insight that I have on that. When you tense up and when you're uncomfortable with the topic of racism in America, you're on the wrong side of things. I don't think you understand what you are doing when you do that. When you tense up and you say, I don't want to hear about it, or you're playing the race card, that is so stupid, actually, to say that. It's very insensitive. It lacks understanding. It lacks any bit of empathy. See, when you are uncomfortable, you are saying that as a white person, I have my life together, I have my privilege, and I don't want to hear about your problems. You guys need to get over it, work hard, and get on board and stop talking about this. Can you imagine, maybe some of you do that, but can you imagine being in a family where you have a child or you have a couple of children in your family out of the other children, and they keep saying, Mom, Dad, I'm in pain. Mom, Dad, I'm suffering. Mom, Dad, I can't sleep at night. Mom, Dad, I feel like I'm always hungry and I'm not getting enough food. And you just go, oh, give it a rest. I don't want to hear about your whining. No, you would say, wait a minute, there's something wrong. We need to figure out why this keeps coming up. And this issue has been coming up it's been here forever. And I'm going to get into that a little bit here. And so what I want to say here is that while you may feel, as a white person, you may feel discomfort, or you may feel like, oh, I don't want to talk about this. This is uncomfortable. The worst feeling that you have as a white person in America, is you feel uncomfortable. Wow. That must be really painful. You feel uncomfortable while people who are human beings, who are created by God, are grieving because their son was shot unarmed and had no choice but to submit to your force, and even with their hands raised or whatever, they were shot dead. Countless families have lost loved ones, and they grieve. They are grieving every day for the people who they have lost. In fact, every time there's a police shooting, they grieve again. And so you can compare your discomfort to what they are going through every day because of the lost ones. And the reality is this. In America, every black person knows their place. In America, there are things that we know that if we go to a job interview, this is possibly what will happen. My name is Mario Depeine. My name sounds like a European name. It's a French name because originally I'm from Haiti. So I speak French also. So when I had interviews and I show up, on the phone, the person was really excited about talking to me and they were excited about my resume. But when I show up, they go, oh, you're Mario Depeine. And I go, yes, I'm Mario Depeine. And I go, and then they say something else, and I'm feeling like, do you need to see ID? They just can't make it out. They just can't figure out how is it that this is a black person and this is his resume? I've had one person say to me, oh, when we saw your name, we thought you were Italian. Okay, that's the code name to saying we thought you were white. I have a friend of mine who decided that, he's a graduate from Princeton, he decided that on my resume, I make sure I put things that are ethnic, like I belong to this black club or this thing for Africa, because he said, I don't want to waste my time going to interviews and they don't accept what I'm saying or treat me as an individual because they see that I am black. He put it on his resume so that people would know ahead of time. If you want me, here's who I am. If you don't want me, don't waste my time. And so I want to give you a little bit of my history as a person who has experienced different things in terms of racism. I probably would say that one of my first experiences dealing with racism or being profiled is when I was probably about 10 years old, I think. My father dropped me off at a shoe store and I was going to meet him down the road at a hardware store. It was called Rickles. It's an old hardware store. And so he dropped me off and I'm running down the street to go meet him. The police stopped me and they asked me, where are you going? I said, I'm going to meet my father. And they said, well, it was a robbery, so we need to check out to see if you're the one who did it, if you were involved. And I said, no, I wasn't. I mean, I just went to the store and I'm going to meet my father. And so they asked me to get in the car, the police car. So they wanted to take me to where my father was. And they're driving around the parking lot and they go, do you know the license plate of your car, your father's car? And I told them the VOD and I told them the rest of the license plate number. They drove around and then they saw the car and then they said, okay, you can go. I don't think there was any robbery. They just were looking at this boy and saying, hey, why is this black boy running? He must have done something wrong. That's America. I'll tell you, growing up, there was a comedian named Sammy Davis Jr. And Sammy Davis Jr. was a comedian and he was also a singer, and he converted to Judaism. He became a Jew. And the biggest joke in America about Sammy Davis Jr. was, ha ha, a black Jew. That is so funny. He's a black Jew. People were laughing about that, and I was saying, yeah, I guess that's odd. But then I realized when you look at history, Jews were black. They were black people. They were people of color. I don't know how black they were, but they had to have been black if they lived in Africa. And I don't buy this stuff about there's the main part of Africa, Northern Africa, and Sub-Saharan. It's Africa. They were from Africa, so they were blacks. But there's this exporting of whiteness all over the U.S. and all over the world that says, here are all the things that belong to whiteness, and here are the things that belong to blackness. So that's my history growing up. And there was also the big joke in growing up is that they were even using it for sitcoms where somebody would go to the doctor and they would go, oh, it's a black doctor. I don't think he's that experienced or that good because he's a black doctor. Okay. I guess I can understand that. In America, if you're a white doctor, most likely you have a lot more resources because that's how America works. If you're a black doctor, you had to scrape, you had to do a lot of more stuff to become a doctor. And the funny thing is, I believe that the doctor who is black in America, especially in the time of the 60s, 70s, and so on, they had to do a lot more work, probably twice as much work to become a doctor, to become a specialist, and overcome a lot of obstacles. So I would probably trust that doctor even more because he didn't get all the breaks that the white doctor had. And there's a lot of white doctors who got a lot of white breaks. We're going to get into that. And so here's the other thing. Another experience that I had as a kid is that we were in Canada. So this is not just America. We're in Canada, and we grew up Catholic. So we looked for a church, and we decided to go to this church as little kids. And we walked into the church, and we're walking in, and it's like time stopped. The people looked at us like, are you lost? Why are you here? It was a white church. And it's little by little we started to realize, oh, it's because we're black and they're all white. And so That is the reality of North America. That's the excuse me, the reality of America, is that there's this line between black and white. I mean, I remember driving in my brother's car, and I guess I was being a knucklehead because my brother, I was in the front seat, and he was in high school, and he's driving, has his license and everything, and I knew he had everything in order, but there was a police car next to me, and I kept on looking at the police car, and he's like, "Stop looking at the police car," and I'm like, and the police like, "Pull over." Pull over. Why? Because you happen to be black. You're looking at my car. You must be suspicious. That's the thing in America. Here's the other thing. During my time at Princeton, it was around the time of affirmative action where Jimmy Carter, I appreciate what Jimmy Carter as a president did in his administration to do the ruling of affirmative action, because it's an action that was taken to make sure that there was more effort to equalize the field between blacks and whites. To say that we're not going to hold these things against you. We're going to give you a chance to get an education. We're going to give you a chance to do all these things, even though you may not have all the ducks in a row that we normally expect, but we believe you have promise. And so we would go there. I remember being at Princeton University and people looking at me like, you don't really belong here. But it was funny. One of my classmates, we were at a meeting, some kind of organization of black students. And he said, you know what? Maybe affirmative action helped me to get in Princeton. But I want to know something. Who's doing my papers? Who's taking my test? Who's writing my thesis? Who is studying for me? Nobody. I'm doing all the work. And so I said, wow, that's really true. He's doing all the work. And there's this stigma that America has put on blacks where blacks are always trying to get a break, always trying to get welfare. Go do your work. Go get a job. Stop being lazy. That's been forever, calling blacks lazy. When blacks built America and was given nothing for it, and we're not given anything for it. There's a lot of atrocities that we have to bring forward and really look at and say, what's going on, America? Do you really feel that comfortable with having everything belong to you and not share? And then you tell your kids to share, but you yourself as an adult, you don't want to share what you've received in America? Are you really seriously thinking that way? And so I can go on with lists of things. I mean, I had a roommate my freshman year. He had a Confederate flag posted on his wall. Very offensive. And the other thing is, every time I came to the room, he was blasting his music as if I wasn't there. I had to keep telling him, hey, put your music down. I'm another person in here. All right? My friend that I talked to you about before, he was running through the Princeton campus full speed because he is training for Taekwondo. He was a black belt. Somebody called, there's a black man running full speed on campus. Uh-oh. Police stopped him. He said, yeah, I'm a student. Here's my ID, etc. So these are things that happen. I go to the store. They say, would you like a bag for that? I said, certainly I want a bag because I don't want to deal with this. I don't want anybody questioning me. As a kid, I would go to the store. I had to make sure, hey, I'm not stealing anything. I'm just shopping. All right. So these are things that I can tell you are my experiences as a Princeton student. And so now what I want to do is just talk a little bit about history, because I think history is very important in this issue. When you think, I'm going all the way back to Egypt. When you think about history, the Israelites were enslaved by the Egyptians for about 400 years. When God decided to use Moses to set the Israelites free, God used several plagues to force Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. Finally, the last plague was a plague of the firstborn. The firstborn son of an animal or the firstborn son of a human being died if they were not protected by the blood on the door that Moses said that they need to have to be for the Passover. That's why Jews had the Passover, because death passed over those people's doors that had the blood of the Lamb. All right, so that was a precursor to Christ, because when you are a Christian, you are being considered as being passed over for the judgment, because you decide that you will do what it takes to have your sins forgiven. So that's a short history. So the funny thing is, once God had the Israelites be set free, he told them, you need to leave Egypt. You need to leave Egypt and you need to start your nation. So when they were finally allowed to leave, when Pharaoh said, go, go, and they were on their way, Pharaoh said, whoa, he realized, he says, what have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services. He said, we lost their services. We don't have slaves anymore. We can't let this happen. We need to go get them back. And so he proceeded to follow them. That God dealt with him and his army, and that was the end of that. And see, this is very relevant here. Oh, before I continue, when God told the Israelites that they were going to be set free, he said to them, you're going to plunder the Egyptians. You need to ask them for articles of gold, jewelry, clothing, all kinds of stuff. And so those people were like, here, take gold, take jewelry. It's like God said, I want you to have something to have with you so that when you go to the new land, you will have something to start off with. Right? So they plundered the Egyptians. Right? Because normally when you lost a battle, people plundered you. So here is something that's parallel for the U.S., for the United States of America, for America. In America, there was slavery that's been documented from the 1500s. And just like the Egyptians enslaving, not the same, but just the fact that the Israelites were in slavery for about 400 years, America has been dealing in a very atrocious manner towards its black population for about 400 years. Because really, they've documented that the first incidence of slavery in America, North America, has been from about early 1500s. All right, early 1500s, even though they say it's more like the 1619, but early 1500s. So then there was a Declaration of Independence in 1776. And then after that, during the Declaration of Independence, there was a big divide whether they were wondering, should we free the slaves? Because it's kind of hypocritical to say we're going to get our freedom, but not free the slaves. The whole thing almost fell apart. They said, okay, well, we'll keep the slaves. All right. So that happened. So about 90 years later, there was Emancipation Proclamation in 1865. That was let the slaves go. And so now we have Pharaoh who said, we have let our services go. And now we have the American slaves, the British slaves who became American slaves. They're like, uh-oh, we're letting these slaves go. We're going to lose their services. And this is in my head. This is a side point. The Egyptians, by the way, were not white. They're not considered white. I don't understand why the U.S. Census has them as listed as white, because they were not white. In fact, when Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt, he was so offended by the Sphinx, the nose of the Sphinx that had a Negroid nose, that he shot the nose off. It was a black nose. It was a Negroid nose. So I think the U.S. Census needs to change that and stop saying Egyptians are white. So let's go back to what I was saying. All right, so 1865, there was Emancipation Proclamation. And then once 1865 happened, these former slave owners were trying to do everything possible to get those slaves back. All right. And so there were laws that they came up with. Some of them were called black laws to restrict how much freedom they had, how much equality they had. So they were doing all kinds of things. And you think about it right now, we have voter suppression laws that are still trying to keep blacks from voting. After the Emancipation Proclamation, as people were trying to find places to live, they restricted where they could live. They did a lot of redlining. All right, there's a lot of things, even things like the war on drugs. All those things have adversely affected and penalized blacks in America. If you could just do your history. And so for slavery lasted for about 340 years. There was the Emancipation Proclamation. And the funny thing is, the U.S. said, and not the U.S., it wasn't the U.S. yet, but the colonists at the time of the British occupation, they decided, hey, we don't want taxation without representation, so we want our freedom. So they were freed from that. Now the U.S. blacks have it worse. We have taxation. We don't have representation much. We're being harassed. We're being incarcerated in an overwhelming number of ways, and we're being killed. You got your freedom from Britain, but you feel okay to mistreat the ones that were former slaves. And that's the interesting thing, is that America never got over the idea of freeing their slaves. They said, we're going to let them be free, but we're going to find ways to suppress them and keep them from moving forward. That's what America has done. And that system was built by our forefathers from 1865 going forward, where the idea was, we're going to agree, we lost the war, the Civil War, we're going to agree and go with this plan to free these slaves, but we're going to find ways to get them back, just like Pharaoh wanted to get them back. So there's a lot of mass incarcerations where they incarcerated a lot of blacks and made them work for free. Same thing as slavery. Very low wages, a lot of things that have happened historically. And so what I look at, when I look at the history, I see one thing that's very clear. During the time of slavery, whites had total rule and total control over blacks because they were the ones in power, they were the ones in who had the majority, right? So the white ancestors, after your white ancestors, after the Emancipation Proclamation, they said, I will not let my children for the future have to deal with the indignity of having to be equal to these people. Because they said, we're going to put things in place to make sure that they are never our equal. And I could understand that kind of thinking, because I thought of an analogy. I said to myself, it's like saying we have the black dogs, black fur dogs, and the tan fur dogs. The tan fur dogs, the dogs with tan fur, were in charge. They made the dogs with the black fur do everything. They worked, they had the labor. If they started to read and started to get knowledgeable, they said, we're going to cut your paws off. We're going to cut your whole leg off. We're going to make sure you don't learn to read, because if you learn to read, you might figure out some things that we don't want you to figure out. We're going to make sure that if we want your kids for more slavery, we're going to take them. And occasionally we might even rape you and have kids with you, but we will keep that secret. But you're still lower than we are. And so those tan fur dogs were in charge over and over and over. And then finally things changed, conditions changed, and they said, we got to let them go free. And they're saying, oh my gosh, they're free. Now what are we going to do? Because these black fur dogs are going to want to do the same things we do. They're going to want to eat in our restaurants, and we didn't want that. They're going to want to go to our schools, and they're going to play with our kids. We don't want that. They are going to want to go to college. We don't want that. They're going to want to look at us at eye level, because blacks in the slave days, you were not, if you dare look at a white man or woman in the eye, you were looking to have your life be taken from you. And so there was a lot of harsh treatments. There were lynchings. There were a lot of killings. White women decided if they were cheating on their husband, they would blame a black person so that they would get they would get the punishment, and those white women would not be, their secret would not come out. I mean, blacks were used for all kinds of stuff. And so we go back to the tan fur dog and the black fur dog. And so they gave them scraps to eat and all this stuff. Now there's this stuff where they are saying that they want to be our equal. And they're saying there is no way in the world that you formerly were under us, that we're going to accept you at our table. We're going to accept you at our schools. We're going to accept you as our equal. That's not going to happen. And so there's a lot of laws that have come up to make sure that that doesn't happen. And we are still feeling the effects of those laws right now. Now, I want to say this, and then I'm going to start wrapping up, because we're going to have to do part 2 of this. This is the thing I'm going to leave you with. The white ancestors decided that they're going to come up with a system where if you're white, you got all the rewards. If you're black, you got all the punishment. So when we look at all the rewards, that's what you get as a white person in America even now. You're part of that system. You see, in America, when during the times of slavery, here's the kind of process that was in place. It's called operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is a psychological term, and it means that when you want to encourage a behavior, you reward that animal or that individual. You keep giving them rewards so they will do that behavior. If you want to discourage a behavior, you give them punishment so that you see less and less of that behavior. That happens all the time when people apply penalties, when people apply sanctions. That's operant conditioning. You're rewarded for good, you're rewarded for bad, whatever the people decide is good or bad. And then we also have something called classical conditioning. Now, classical conditioning is something that when I first learned about that in high school psychology, it was bugging my mind because I was trying to get everything sorted out. You had an experiment where it was Pavlov's dog. Pavlov realized by mistake that every time the dog heard the bell ring, the dog started to salivate. And he's like, why is the dog salivating? Then he realized that, what he realized is this. Let me not mess it up now. In classical conditioning, let's say you have the dog sees meat, and the dog salivates. That's called the unconditioned stimuli, unconditioned response. So you just have a response from something that the dog is affected by. So Pavlov decided that I'm going to pair the meat with a bell. Every time the dog sees the meat, he's going to hear the bell, so that the dog can get used to the idea of just hearing the bell, and then he's going to salivate because he's going to have it in his mind that the bell means meat or food. So that's part of a conditioned response. So that becomes a conditioned stimuli and a conditioned response. The conditioned stimuli is the bell. The conditioned response is the salivating. You ring the bell, the dog salivates. So getting back to racism. Racism. When you think about racism, I don't think it's so much about white people not liking black skin. The black skin or the tan skin, the black skin or the dark skin or whatever shade, or we want to call it color, we talk about colored people. Back then, they didn't care about colored people. They said if you had a drop of black in you, you're black. All right. So when you were considered black, they said black people will get punishment and white people will get rewards. So for classical conditioning, they started to say, we're going to make black so bad that no matter where they go, they're not going to be treated right. So that's where the stereotypes come in. They're lazy. All they do is eat chicken. All they do is they want to sleep. They're ugly. They don't clean themselves. All the stereotypes that are associated with black becomes the conditioned stimuli. So anybody who sees black skin now is like, oh, hold your purse. Uh-oh, no, that's a lazy one. He's not going to do the work. There's all these mental things going on that says that black is wrong, white is right. Black is at the bottom, white is at the top. And so for the white person, everything on television, everything in print, it's like nice music, give them all the rewards that they should get. So to be a black person, you go out and you go, okay, I can expect to be mistreated. I can expect to be incarcerated possibly. I mean, it was so bad that I was watching a story about a young black guy who helped rescue these white women, young girls who were held captive for years. And one of the things he said was, oh, I was surprised. There's a white girl calling a black person for help. So he's giving an interview, and while he's doing the interview, he heard a police siren, whoop, whoop, and I said, oh my gosh, right on television, this poor guy is so conditioned to get punishment or mistreatment because he knows, he's internalized, I'm black, I'm going to get punished. While the white person in America goes, wherever I go, I expect good treatment. Wherever I go, I expect to get the job. Wherever I go, I'm going to be considered as number one. And if there's a black person there, I'm first. That is a system of racism in America where there's this big emphasis on doing everything possible to pair black skin with negative things. And, you just think about it. You think about black male, the word black male, the black sheep of the family. You think about all these terms that people have used loosely, and the black list. In IT, people will tell me, okay, we need to whitelist that, and that one shouldn't be. And I go, ugh. And if I say it, be like, oh, what's the big deal? No, you're saying that all the things that are white are good, and all the things that are black are bad. That's classical conditioning. That is the classical way of saying everything we do is based on the color. And so racism is more about a class structure that says that we need a way to differentiate between who gets the rewards in America and who doesn't. The whites get the rewards and the blacks do not. Because God forbid we should ever consider them are equal, because our ancestors set it up this way. So as a white person, it's true, you're not responsible for slavery. Nobody should condemn you for that. But you are responsible for this classical conditioning, this racism that you're promoting and that you're taking advantage of. You see, if you don't renounce it, if you don't really actively see how to fix it and change it, you are promoting this system of calling blacks lesser than whites, when technically, biologically, there's no difference. No difference at all. And so we're going to talk some more next time on this issue of reward and punishment. Because the attitude, the mindset is, if I'm black, I can expect punishment when I walk out my door, and I could even get punishment if I call the police to help me. That's how it's set up. But if I'm white, if you're white, you go, life is good. I can go to any store and I will get preferential treatment. I can go to any school and I will get preferential treatment. You have affirmative action. You have a system set up that says everywhere you go, you have perks. Membership has its advantages. You have perks as a white person every single place you go. And then you export this racism all over the world so that even people in China, people in Japan, as they watch the movies that you make, they go, oh, the black people, we have to be careful of these people because look what they do. Because you're exporting the same poison all over the world. Because you want to make sure you get all your rewards, and black people get all the punishment. Now, I'm going to close out with this passage from Philippians chapter 2 and 3. It says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, Value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. You see, this passage is saying to Christians, don't be about your selfish ambition or your vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourself. How about a white person consider a black person better than him or her? Is that possible? Can you actually work that out in your system to say, you're better than me and I'm going to give you better treatment? Can you do that? And see, what I want to say about this passage is that a Christian nation cannot continue to do this if you are a Christian nation. In fact, right now, America is a selfish nation. It's a selfish, greedy nation right now. And don't you dare tell me, then leave America. It's not your place to tell me to leave or stay in America. You're just one person. God is the one that decides whether I stay or leave America, not you. And see, it's true that God has allowed this to happen, but I also believe that God is also wanting this to change. And I believe we need to do everything possible to change it right now, to put all the resources, all the necessary talks to get this to change this year. The momentum needs to keep going. And so this part 2, I want to talk about continuation about the rewards and the punishments for the blacks and whites. And then I also want to talk about African history and white supremacy. Thank you so much for listening, for hanging in there, for being with me. I know yesterday I had the technical difficulties, but we worked it out. I appreciate your time. And if you believe in what I said, you agree with what I said, share this. Subscribe to my page so that when I do the next part 2, you will get a notification and you'll be ready to go. Thank you. God bless you.